Appreciate that. Now we're going to move to introduce our panelists. We have a few panelists in person and some online that you can see on the screen. Jessica and I are going to introduce briefly our panelists. Please save any clapping until the end, and then we'll get to the question and answer and discussion. So first on my left is Brian Ritchie. Brian Ritchie is a member of the Chapleau Cree First Nation, and he's the founder and CEO of an Indigenous artificial intelligence company called Kama AI. Brian possesses a Bachelor of Engineering from Lakehead University and an MBA from Lake Superior State University. Prior to funding Kama AI, Brian held a VP and director level sales and marketing position with ChangePoint, ZTE, Ericsson, and Oracle, a very impressive list. Brian sits on the advisory council of the accelerator Ingenuity at Lakehead University and the Ted Rogers School of Management MBA program. Brian is a board member of Carey's Place, Canada's largest autism agency, and several Indigenous economic development corporations. Brian, we're so honored to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's my honor to introduce John Harrison, who's joining us on screen today. John is a member of Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation. He brings both industry insight and cultural perspective to discussions on data sovereignty. Born in Sioux Narrows, Ontario, John moved to Alberta in 1978 to begin his career in the oil and gas sector, starting as a welder and progressing to pipeline supervisor. His experience led him to co-found Northridge Energy Development Group in Calgary and later establish Makwa 7, a company dedicated to information management and geospatial mapping, especially for Indigenous communities. John is the founder and CRO at Makwa, where he emphasizes partnerships that help First Nations manage to protect their data. His work aligns with his commitment to providing tools that foster Indigenous self-governance and cultural preservation. Thank you for being here today, John. We're so glad to have you.
It's my honor to introduce Neil Glasenberg, second on my left. Neil Glasenberg is an accomplished technology executive with a robust background in leading and developing high-performing teams. As an executive vice president and chief technology officer at Makwa 7, Neil has been instrumental in crafting innovative strategies for delivering culturally sensitive information management services to First Nations and Indigenous communities. His leadership in establishing a sovereign data center on Indigenous land underscores his commitment to data sovereignty and community empowerment. Before joining Makwa 7, Neil held senior role at Apple and Ventry Technologies, where he consistently demonstrated his ability to manage large teams, drive operational excellence, and execute strategic initiatives that enhance customer satisfaction and business growth. Neil's experience spans various industries, including retail and oil and gas, with a focus on developing and implementing advanced SaaS solutions and operational frameworks. Neil was born in Johannesburg, South Africa, and moved to Canada as a teenager. He currently resides in Calgary with his wife, Raina, and son, Oliver. Thank you so much, Neil, for flying in to join us. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to introduce Hannah Paul, who's next on the panel here in person. Hannah is Métis and Beaver First Nation on her dad's side and Ukrainian and French on her mom's side. Hannah's family names are Paul, Lizotte, Lambert, Lafleur, Andreyuk, and Rothier. Her Métis community is locally known as Buttertown, North Vermilion Settlement, although she grew up in Fort McMurray, Alberta. Hannah wanted to bring her moontime and body image research idea back to her Métis community, since Indigenous youth and women's confidence is often affected by colonial body shame and taboos. She recently obtained her Master's of Arts degree at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan campus, right here. Her master's research project discusses Métis women's stories about moontime and colonial body shame through visiting and berry picking in Buttertown, Alberta. She was the 2023 Master's Research of the Year Award recipient and received the 2023-2024 Thesis Award for her work. Hannah now works in the Office of Research Services as the Indigenous Research Facilitator at UBCO. Thank you for being here, Hannah.
Is Majid with us? Is Majid here? I'm going to introduce Majid. I know he's going to be able to join us for a little bit of time. Dr. Majid Mohseni is a professor of chemical and biological engineering at UBC Vancouver. As a world-leading expert in drinking water quality and treatment, he has pioneered several water treatment technologies for the removal of emerging contaminations in water. As a scientific director of the Community Circle on Scaling Business Innovation for Humanity, which is a nonprofit funded by ISED with support from industry, government, NGOs, and community partners, he is dedicated to advancing socioeconomically and technologically sustainable water health solutions for Indigenous communities. Through fostering open learning and collaboration across traditionally soiled sectors, Majid has made invaluable contributions to water quality and Indigenous community health. Under Majid's leadership, the Community Circle has launched programs that lifted several longstanding boil water advisory in Indigenous communities. And just as a note, Dr. Majid, oh, hello. Yes, hello. We see you now. Just as a note, we're so appreciative of you being able to join us. We know it's a very, very busy morning for you. Dr. Majid will need to sign off at 10:55, so we'll try to squeeze all the questions in advance. Welcome.
Thank you. Next up on the screen there is Craig Carpenter. Craig is the director of Talking Owl Technologies and a digitization specialist at the Anaukin Center since 2020. He is a driving force in applying AI for Indigenous language revitalization. An Emmy-winning sound specialist, he is actively working to decolonize the development of speech technologies and champion community-led language initiatives. His Master's of Arts thesis produced the first interactive digital edition of We Are the People, a trilogy of Okanagan legends in Insilchin. Using automatic speech-to-text alignment and critiquing colonial practices embedded in computer science and linguistics, he has published papers at the LREC's 2024 Special Interest Group for under-resourced languages, the Audio Engineering Society's 2023 conference, and the 2022 Sound and Music Computing Conference. He plans to pursue his PhD at UBCO beginning in the fall of 2025, focusing on expanding his exploration of generative AI and the multimodal languages learning technologies alongside decolonizing frameworks that emphasize data sovereignty and Indigenous-led development. Welcome, Craig. Thank you so much for joining us.
Last, but certainly not least, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Raymond Lawrence as the department head of computer science at UBC Okanagan, and he's the former academic director of the Center of Teaching and Learning. He's a leading voice at UBC, establishing guidelines and innovative approaches for the effective use of AI in education. Dr. Lawrence's commitment to teaching has earned him numerous accolades, including UBC's Award for Teaching Excellence and Innovation, the Killam Teaching Prize, and 9 placements on UBCO's Teaching Honor Roll, recognizing the top 10 instructors. His research focuses on pedagogical impact of AI and the use of automated systems to enhance and support student support, feedback, and assessment. His latest work introduced the Help Me system, which is a tool that enables students to receive real-time assistance from instructors and teaching assistants, leveraging AI for chatbot-driven responses and discussion support. In addition to his academic achievements, Dr. Lawrence is the founder of Unity Data Inc., which is a company specializing in consulting and software solutions for data management, integration, and reporting. Dr. Lawrence approaches the discussion on AI from a technological perspective and values hearing Indigenous voices on its impact. And we're very grateful to Dr. Raymond Lawrence for facilitating the workshop later on today. So this is the impressive panel list that we have. Please go ahead and welcome them. Thank you. So we're going to jump into the questions. And before just doing that, just a couple housekeeping things. You're going to see maybe somebody waving at the back and so forth. So just to let you know. These questions do not come from Jessica and myself. They're aggregated, and we're going to be sharing them with the panelists. Each panelist has 3 to 5 minutes to answer a question. Now, Thivina, thank you, Thivina, will be messaging our panelists that are remote when we're about a minute from your completion times to start wrapping up the thought. And for those of us in person, Riley at the back will be waving. All right. Thank you, Thivina, and thank you, Riley. So without further ado, our first question directed to you, Brian. How does an Indigenous person from Northern Ontario find themselves in the middle of the hottest technological evolution in the 21st century? How did you find the connection between AI and Indigenous peoples?
Thank you very much for the question. Get ready to wave your flag there, Riley. Yeah, I'll try to make this short, but it's very foundational in terms of what we've already heard today, even with Crystal and her concerns and opportunities in AI. So I graduated university in 1984. My dad passed away in 1986. So even before I became a deep technologist or whatever, he had already passed away. And at one point, I was driving my mom from a place we used to live in, Sault Ste. Marie, back to our hometown of Chapleau. And this was maybe 5 years after my dad passed. And she said, I had a dream about your dad last night, and it was so nice to talk to him. And it was, I know he's gone, but I just wish there was some way I could have that conversation. And that got stuck in my head, of course. Then various things happened. I had another startup. Me and my oldest brother, who is about 76 years old now and is an elder in his own right, we came up with a design for a knowledge base. And a knowledge base is a new type of technology. You hear now graph AI or graph databases. So we came up with this idea of a graph database that could hold knowledge. Person can consume water. What does that mean? Well, okay, that means I can drink some water. But it's two things joined by a verb-like thing. Person can consume water. Well, how would a machine understand that? Well, let's put some labels and some ratings on that. And then we said that, okay, if we put labels and ratings, why don't we use human values as a way of rating this information in the knowledge base? That became an idea, and then a patent application, and then patents started to come out. And then we started building a product. The interesting thing about being truthful to AI and the Indigenous perspectives, I guess, is the way we were going to build this is different than what you hear today with ChatGPT and large language models. Ours was going to be, here's a question, here's an answer stub, more or less, in the knowledge graph, but here's the real spoken answer. Here's the story, here's the song, here's the recording of the song. All that information is authentic, truthful information by those people. So it's the real information. It's not information that's generated from real information. That's what's going on in the, and that's very good technology. It's excellent technology for research, summarization, but it's not good to preserve culture. It's not good to preserve the storytelling that Indigenous people or any people want to tell and to preserve a legacy, to preserve a culture. And I connected that with the ability for my mom to eventually have a conversation with my dad, because we could understand his values, we can understand his stories, he could tell his stories, and maybe eventually with those values, maybe he could even think, or that machine could even think like he would have thought, because it's run by the same values that his mind ran on. So fast forward, here we are, and we released a product in 2020, and now we've got very good customers. We've entered the educational space with a community college recently. So that is how I found myself in this area.
Thank you, Brian. Next question is to John and Neil. This is going to be fun. John is going to start answering, and Neil will continue. There's a team tag. The question for you is, MACWA 7 works hard to provide tailored solutions for data collection, storage, and analysis that respects Indigenous values and priorities, empowering communities to maintain control over their information and cultural identity. What challenges do First Nation communities face implementing data sovereignty, and how can organizations like yours support First Nations communities?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be talking about this very important topic as it evolves. So, as my data journey has taken me back to communities, and I've had the opportunity to speak to communities across the country, and on the aspect of data sovereignty and what is it, and it's been apparent to me as we get down is that there's the idea of data and data literacy. You can only have sovereign data if you have the data. And so understanding what data is and how it can be used for the betterment of the community is what I find is one of the hurdles that has to be addressed. As far as what we can do for it, we work with communities to try to get them to have an understanding of such, so that it can be used for their community.
Thanks, everyone. I'll add to that. I think, a tailored approach is critically important. Crystal alluded to that this morning, right? For her, going to the mountains and spending time there is something that's sacred. And for other communities, there's other things that are important. And so I think it's that tailored approach of meeting the community where they're at, understanding what's important to them. And then, as John mentioned, the piece about data literacy and ensuring that you can educate on the importance of data and where that is, and then ultimately where data gets stored, how it gets managed, and who has access to that data, right? That's the critical component that is often missed today. We hear a lot of times of, big companies that have data breaches. We rarely hear the stories about Indigenous communities that have been taken advantage of with their data that has been gathered and is being used on their behalf without their permission. Right. And so for us, it's really the education piece combined with the ability to offer a trusted place where we can make sure that data is owned, controlled, and accessed by them.
Thank you so much. The next question is for Hannah. Hannah, your work focuses on Indigenous research, and I know relationality is a really key theme for you. Can you briefly share what relationality means to you and what challenges might arise with Gen AI and reproducing Indigenous knowledge without the element of relationality?
So to me, is that better? Yeah. Okay. To me, relationality is a key way of being within and outside of my role as an Indigenous research facilitator and as a Métis cousin, granddaughter, and community member, but also someone on unceded and currently occupied Syilx territory too. And that's inherently interwoven with Syilx sovereignty and thinking about that in both personal and professional life, which is a really important aspect of being on this land. But while visiting around kitchen tables, especially with my research as well, and with family, it's clear to me that relationality is, of course, rigorous on its own and without Western affirmation. But a big piece of that, and being around, say, a kitchen table where knowledge transmission and mobilization happens, anyways, and always has been since time immemorial. There's a really key piece of relational accountability that's built into being in person and with relationships and with relations and family members. And that's the genealogy of the knowledge, where it's coming from and how you can always trace it back. And so now you're responsible to that person, to that piece of knowledge that you now have gained through that relationship that you've created. And so that's a really important piece that I think that AI has yet to capture, or maybe it shouldn't capture, and maybe captures an important word there of whether that's, something that it even should do. But yeah, so that's an important piece as well is, of course, the relationship to land. That's going to be something that's very important to all different Indigenous nations. And that's not to be a pan-Indigenous sort of thing. It's just something that is intricately connected to both language and knowledge is, of course, land as well. That is where the lessons and the laws come from. And so again, that's something that cannot necessarily be replicated, but is really important to consider when we're looking at Indigenous knowledges and relationality with AI. Of course, in my role as an research facilitator, it's really important for me to help researchers consider their positionality, and so self-locating and seeing themselves in that research. And like Crystal was talking about with positionality and finding yourself and going onto the land to sit with self and look into self, that's a whole other process that is so personal and private. And so it would even be cool if, Crystal was on here and having a Syilx auntie to talk about those aspects, because that could definitely inform something around AI as well. But yeah, so this is pieces that are grounded in responsibilities of kinship for all beings, right? Walking group with Jessica and some Indigenous staff on campus here. And so something we talk about is how important it is to, connect with the land, obviously, but something that named Cardinal, who I don't think is here, but I'm so grateful that he shared some quotes. And one of them was Dr. Dwayne Donald from the U of A. And it was about Wakotwin, which is the Cree law of kinship, right? But the word is literally, of course, never translatable exactly to English. And so that's an important piece as well as that, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis of, translatability, which is another important piece is you can't control how the knowledge in AI is going to be disseminated or understood as well, which, is an issue. But the word Wakotwin broken down is bent, walking over the land, reciprocity, movement concept. So like, of course, you can never be fully captured, but like the point is that connection and being there, bent over, not on a phone or anything like that, like looking at the land and connecting to it in that way. And so, I think about that with relationality and being a huge piece of, those aspects of ensuring that you're being in good relationship, not only to, your kin and then community and family, but also with the land as well. Felt like I had something else to say about, sitting down. Oh, yes. Yeah. The timing of it is like relationality is a slow process. Thank you. And I swear this is my last point, is a slow process, like apparently. And I heard a laugh. I like that. And so it takes a story to, fully be implemented in like minds and young minds. Sometimes takes 2 weeks to sit with an elder and like listen to a story. Like back then we had time to sit for back then there was time to sit for 2 weeks and listen to a story and fully get involved with what the meanings and the laws were embedded. And so like those transmissions of knowledge were so much slower, where AI is, meant to be exponentially quick and be able to build on itself. And, we're not sure where the algorithms are always coming from, but it's cool to hear how people are really thinking about that with these AI companies beside me. Yeah, thank you.
We're off. Thanks, Hannah. I also really cherish all the time we get to spend together and with Name Cardinal, who's not here today, but he's here in spirit.
Thank you, Hannah. Majid, question for you, please. Given the challenges faced by some Indigenous communities in maintaining water treatment systems, how could AI be integrated to support the operation and maintenance of these systems while ensuring reliability and sustainability?
Okay. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. And it's a great pleasure to be here and joining you from UBC Vancouver, unceded and ancestral territory of Musqueam Nation. So I'm really pleased to join you. To your question, so I mean, if you think about AI, that really has the capability to gather data, synthesize data, and utilize data to be able to solve some of the issues or challenges that we have. So if you think about water that comes into our tap, well, it's affected by, or the quality of the water is affected by how the source is. And the source of water, whether it's a lake or groundwater or a creek, anything, is affected by the weather, precipitations, or anything that could happen upstream, whether resource extractions or human activities or anything that could happen. So the quality of that water changes and could change quite frequently depending on the conditions that we have. And also, the quality is affected by how our treatment system is operating. And often during the treatment systems, we either add energy of some sort. Like, for example, when we want to treat water with ultraviolet, we use energy, or we use chemicals. We add chlorine, we add some what we call coagulants and so on to improve the quality of the water. So eventually it comes to our tap clean and safe. Now, there are variabilities, and all these variabilities require operational interventions. Means that an operator needs to go there and adjust the level of treatments, the level of energy required, or level of basically chemicals. And now, with that, of course, with those fluctuations that could happen upstream, if we can utilize AI, and there are ways to do that, to be able to optimize, or for the AI, for the system to be able to predict how the weather is going to be changing. Or, for example, when we have certain amount of rainfall, what will be the impact of that on quality and how much additional energy we need to add on. So with all those optimizations, AI can help really adjust or help the operator to adjust those levels or the levels of energy or chemicals used, and not only to ensure that the water is going to come clean, so the chances of error is going to go away. For example, if the operator is not around, it can adjust itself. So all of those are able to help with the operation of the system. Another way that it can do, and in fact, we've been fortunate to work with Brian and his team to actually create a conversational basically, or a chatbot, which really utilizes conversational AI. You can ask Brian in terms of details of how the actual technology works, but that actually is support for the operator. So the operators, if he has a question, or if there is an issue, it can actually go into the chatbot and actually have a conversation to be able to get the answer. So if the operator has a question, for example, says that, okay, well, there is a rain here and the water is going to affect my water, how I'm going to respond to that. And then there is a response comes back. It's like many of the chatbots that we are used to it. So that way also it can provide extremely valuable support to the operators. And of course, with Brian's help, we actually generated something that could actually help community members as well to be able to learn about water and to be able to relate to what's happening in their water treatment systems.
Thank you so much, Majid. That's amazing. Our next question is for Craig. Craig, you've done some really incredible work with language digitization. Through this process, you've ensured language revitalization efforts are genuinely community-led and aligned with Indigenous values. Unintentional biases might arise from colonial approaches in fields like computer science and linguistics. What are some of the strategies that you recommend to guard against this?
Well, thanks for the question, and thanks for having and setting this up. I think really one of the best strategies is that we continue this conversation and we really start to look at how we can work across disciplines in meaningful ways. So how can we avoid Western bias when we're working with Indigenous cultures? I think to understand that the nature of, for example, natural language processing, which I think is really what my work in AI is it talks about, because what I did is I helped adapt a tool that's a speech-to-text aligner that would support language acquisition. My main hope for moving forward in the field of AI is that the community leaders take the lead when it comes to how AI is being used and how we can actually develop AI. So I'm always checking back in, and of course the 4 R's are things that we need to always keep in mind in terms of responsibility, relevance, and reciprocity when it comes to thinking about how we stay connected to the community and our tools don't become extractive. Because I think one of the things that I've learned and I'm so grateful for, and what I realize I'm helping Thetis Books these days a bit as doing some editorial coordination. I've been reading the late Greg Younging's Elements of Indigenous Style. And one of the points he makes strongly is that settlers and researchers actually have a lot to learn, more to learn from Indigenous ways of knowing that Indigenous people have to learn from settlers. And I really feel that's true. I've spent 4 years working with the Analkan Center, And I'm really grateful for everything I've learned. And I really appreciate what Crystal says. We have to slow down. But AI, it's been released. But I think one of the positive things that I can see from an NLP standpoint is you could say that of the 7,000 languages in the world, there's only a small handful that can leverage the affordances of AI right now. Maybe, very, very few really. And so all the computational linguists are scrambling to sort of find ways to answer the under-resourced language problem, right? And I think we have an opportunity to approach the so-called problem from an Indigenous way of knowing, which is not a Western way of knowing, which is more what I would like to think of as more holistic, and what if you read people like Joanne Archibald and Margaret Kovac and these Indigenous scholars talking about Indigenous methodologies, and even our own scholars at UBCO who are really pioneering Indigenous research. And I think the focus needs to be really reflexive. And when I say reflexive, it means to really think about our own minds and what it means to be extractive. And I think it's an epistemic issue, right? It comes back to how we know something. And so the research, just like Dr. Sean Wilson says, you're doing the research right if the research is changing you as a person. And so I just put up my hands to all the Indigenous people I've worked with, because they've changed me and my way of thinking, and continue to, and I'm just continually humbled by that. And so best way is to continue this dialogue just like this. So thanks.
Thank you for that, Greg. That was actually so inspiring. And I love what you just said around continuing the conversation. Next question is for you, Raymond. You have a robust knowledge on AI technology and education, with interest in understanding AI impacts on Indigenous communities. With that in mind, what are some key considerations around the integration of AI into learning design?
Thank you very much for the question. I first want to say thank you for allowing me to participate in this event. I'm really looking forward to learning from everybody in the room. We have such a diverse audience here, diverse participants. The opportunity to learn from each other is so important, and I really appreciate that today. So before I talk about AI and learning design, I want to actually have you reflect for a moment on how AI has impacted your own life. What's your relationship with AI right now in terms of maybe your career or your personal life or how you use it? Just think for a second, what does AI mean to you? I'm not going to ask you for what it is right now, but I want you to hold that, because the reason it's important is AI is one of these technological revolutions that we all have to have a response to. That response is highly personal. There's no exact answer to this, but just like other technologies that came before it, like the computer revolution, the internet, everything we have on the cloud, mobile phones, social media, you all have, knowingly or not, come up with your response to that. So I'll use social media as an example. Some people are highly active in social media, and that is an integral part of their lives. Other people have chosen, maybe for mental health reasons or others, to not be engaged in social media at all. AI is another one of these technologies where you are going to have to decide what your relationship with it is. But you have to decide some relationship. The one thing I definitely want to argue for is you can't put your head in the sand. This is not a technology that's going to go away. It's something that you're going to have to decide how it impacts you. So now to frame that in the educational context, as educators, we have to figure out what that means to keep the humanity in our classrooms, but maybe use the AI in certain ways. And just like every classroom is slightly different, there's no one answer on how AI applies in particular courses in educational contexts. So in my research group, we actually have built a system where students can get help by posting something and AI answers the question first. But then they have the opportunity to say, I don't really like what AI says. Please put me in contact with a TA or instructor. So we always have the human in the loop there. And as part of this research, we actually asked the question, what courses are well covered by the AI that we have currently available to us and what are not? And it wouldn't be a surprise that the content that AI has been well trained on, the mathematics, the computer science, the very Western content, that content accurately reflects what you would want to teach in most of courses that way. But if you do maybe upper year courses, or especially, we haven't done the experiments, but I expect with Indigenous knowledge in courses, because we aren't certain how AI has been trained and what's available, it's highly likely that the answers that you're going to get back from generic AI will not reflect the values that you want to provide in your course. So once again, it's not a clear-cut answer. Yes, we use AI, or no, we do not. But it's something that each of us as instructors have to take that critical lens. How does it apply to my course? How does it apply to my teaching style? How does it apply to the content that I have to deliver? And most importantly, I want to emphasize, to be an effective instructor, we don't want to be replaced by AI. One of the fears I have is students are using AI. They are using it for the assignments. So the research clearly shows that doesn't matter as an instructor whether you allow it or not, whether you emphasize it or not, students are using AI to do their work, for better or worse. So if you don't get on top of it as an instructor and communicate your value system towards AI, then they don't know. They're actually looking at you to figure out what makes sense and what's good ideas in terms of AI. So I'll come back to this on my second question, but my biggest message is here. You need to decide your relationship with AI, and that may depend on the educational context. What is your course content and what are you trying to convey? And I'd really argue from the Indigenous content perspective, we're pretty certain it's not going to necessarily reflect what you want covered in your courses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raymond. We really appreciate your ability to weave the Indigenous knowledges and tech and education all into one. And we really appreciate you being here and answering that question. We're going back to the top. So Mike, next question's for Brian. Brian, many of us here might be a little unsure about what Gen AI really is or what it really means, and it's totally okay if that's the case. Artificial intelligence has just long been a topic of sci-fi books and movies, and its interaction with human experience. Of course, you see examples of AI taking over the world. Do you think that we need to be worried about the evolution of AI and its influence on all humankind?
Ooh, yeah, that's a big one. So recently, I think we heard Jeffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize this year, along with a co-worker, say that this could be the end of humanity. So absolutely, and he's a much smarter person than I am on AI. So absolutely, the concern is there, and I think it was Spider-Man's father that said, "With great power comes great responsibility." So especially as a builder, or others who are influencing builders, or even users, I think that saying, offers a lot to us. We have to look at how we're building it. We have to look at how we're using it. I was in another conference, and there was a woman who comes from a group. She's a PhD in energy management and engineering, and she was talking about a friend of hers who says, "I don't even use my calculator on my cell phone anymore. I ask ChatGPT what an answer is to a calculation." That is a total misuse of energy, of everything, right? So why would you do that? You're going to ask a question here, it's going to go up to the internet, it's going to calculate somewhere in OpenAI and come back to your phone. That is a terrible waste of everything, and it might be wrong. That's the problem as well, right? So right tool, right place. Mark, who's one of my business partners, has said that everyone will use a spectrum of AI products. I really like what Raymond said, that there are certain things where AI can do a very good thing and play a pretty good role, but there are other places where you absolutely need the human perspective, and I think that we cannot miss that. I was just reading a paper this morning, and we're collaborating with the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, in Toronto, and we've written 3 papers now. I'm just reviewing, so I don't do the research, but there was people in the study, 24 youth, who all have multiple mental health disorders, and the notes that they had incorporated into the paper were, I don't want to have to wonder whether this is a suggestion that is imagined by an AI, or is this something a real clinician or a therapist might have said to me. I have to know this is coming from a therapist, right? So in certain applications, especially mental health treatment, it needs to be grounded in human information, and maybe literal human information, because many of the things we see with generative AI, your question also talked about generative AI. Ours is not generative AI. It's more like passing on those real world words of the storytellers, the knowledge keepers, making sure that you get the right information, the real perspectives on the language or the courses that are being taught or whatever. That's what we're all about. You can ground something in information, but the generative AI model can mix that up, and that's what's called a hallucination in the industry. Well, if that potential is there, then you have to watch. Is that one of our prospective customers from a major financial institution in Canada calls this front-facing AI. If the person who you're going to give the result to expects to use it and expects it to be accurate, that's the most critical one. And in those cases, you really have to watch about whether you're using the right stuff. And we have to watch where we put controls for things like automatic code generation. The software can create more software. Those are very slippery slopes. And I think that's where Jeffrey Hinton is saying that there's potential there for very bad things to happen. So we really have to, as with great power comes great responsibility, we have to watch how we build these tools and use the tools.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that perspective. Question for you, John and Neil, about relationships and trust. So relationships are key to the success of any good project, program, or company. What role does trust play in the success of sovereign data management, and how can partnerships with Indigenous community help build this trust?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think that as we talk, and I hear that other speakers talk about managing data and information, and the data that they're requesting and asking for at the community level, a lot of it isn't even available to because it's in stories, maybe it's in boxes of data. Like the idea that over the generations, the data that has been shared about us has been misused in a lot of ways, right? So the idea that when we go into community and we try to discuss and talk with the community members, and we say we want to build a sovereign data set, right? And to say with this information that we're going to use it for the betterment of your community and your peoples. Well, that story has been told many times before, and a lot of times it hasn't proven to be true. So as we go to communities and we ask about them, and we say we can use that data, a lot of our approach is to have those discussions one-on-one with the members, with the elders, but we identify things that we can prove our trust, prove by having measurable outcomes with it. And when we do that, we find that we start building that respect with the communities. But no communities are the same. They're very similar in a lot of ways, but they're not the same. My community of Wabigoon is different. We look at things a bit differently than our neighboring community of Eagle Lake, and so therefore, when we go and we have these discussions about data sovereignty, and we strive to talk about data governance and how that data is governed, does it go to an AI like this that Brian and I have talked, and he shared some of the stuff, and I truly believe that his tools will help us for the trust and advancement of some of these stories along the way, because it's a true way to govern what is said about us, and we can share. My goal as a organization is to give community their voice to tell their story when they want and who they want with it, so that we can guide. But I believe there's no silver bullet, but the approach is a one community and a one-on-one basis. So trust that's how I believe that is built.
Yeah, thank you. I would add to what John said and say, trust takes many forms. it also takes a lot of time, oftentimes. And patience is something that John and my wife will tell you probably doesn't come that easy to me. But I like instant gratification and things to happen quickly. And, you know, when we go into community, a project recently that just kind of came to fruition to the end of its life this summer for us. We were working on a project for a year and a half, and it wasn't until we put a physical server in community with that community's data set on it that we noticed that they could trust the data and see, because they could, you know, physically see where that server was. It was in their community. They knew where it was. And so it was like a light went on and trust went there. We've been in other situations where, you know, having John as an Indigenous person on site in community, they say, you know, we want to see the whites of your eyes. And so there's that human element that has to be there. You know, being able to relate to people in different ways and being able to, you know, sit there in fellowship. We've had situations where we're dealing with very sensitive data, residential school data, and you know, that process has to go to ceremony before the community members will want to trust that that data becomes even electronic. And so that takes time. It's taken weeks sometimes to go through, you know, different elders and ceremonies. And so we just have to go on that journey with the community and very specific to that community. And that trust is vital before we can, you know, go down the path with them. So.
Thank you so much for those examples. Over to you, Hannah. One of the fears that we hear around the risks of AI is the risk that AI is going to appropriate Indigenous knowledges that are sacred and should only remain accessible to the people who have the right to know. What ethical issues come up here, and how might we try to protect this knowledge? What solutions might we consider?
Thank you. What's definitely important is the information ensuring that Indigenous communities understand the depth of Gen AI and what it's capable of, and also the foundations of it. It's really important as well. Of course, Indigenous knowledge systems aren't stagnant and, you know, don't stay in the past. They're very cyclical and will always have relevance on the land that they've been practiced and known and lived since time immemorial. So it is important for them to understand the implications of AI so that they can decide, of course, on their own, whether that's something that they want to engage with and where they want their information going. Another interesting aspect of, you know, research in general, and something that I think about in my role, but also Western technology, is that it, in a lot of ways, the foundations of it has been created to oppress these knowledge systems and is built on the concept of, you know, Western positivism as well. So that's something that needs to, you know, be acknowledged and addressed in these foundations before, you know, and that's part of like these starting conversations and continuing the conversations, because of course, like, it does not end here and it doesn't end with this panel for sure. And as Crystal was talking about, we're still very much in the truth aspect of, you know, truth and reconciliation. You know, I find that sometimes it feels like a bubble being in academia and having these conversations a lot, but outside, that's not necessarily the conversations that are happening. And so, yeah, the person next to you might not be as interested in Indigenous knowledges, and what they take and do with that is kind of up to in the air, depending on where that knowledge lands with AI and the expansive use that it could have. A small solution, I think, to the appropriation, the potential appropriation, is those built-in layers of security that have been developed by, I believe, Indigenous actually organizations, but local context is what I'm thinking about. And so they use traditional knowledge labels and biocultural labels to basically think about ways that there's different doors basically that allow access, just in digitization in general. And so I don't know how that would be replicated in AI, but that's an important piece that has been practiced. And it's an important piece of intellectual property and, you know, creating that licensing to ensure that Indigenous knowledges, are protected and it's led by community, but also that certain families or genders or whatever have access to that specific knowledge that could be paralleled in community, where they would just, you know, have family knowledge of specific, like if they're fire keepers, and then that's just within that family, because that's something that they have been experts on since time immemorial in that lineage. So thinking about those aspects and those solutions are very small steps, especially since, you know, another basis of, you know, AI is we're not sure how to, I think, I mean, I'm no expert, but we're not so sure, it seems, on how to make it a bit more energy efficient. It has a lot of water consumption, a part of this, and energy consumption. Like you said about the calculations and the misuse of it is still, you know, something that has to be grappled with. And how do you control that, or can it be controlled? And so these are some things that, of course, I'm thinking about with AI and what it means to still be in good relationship to land and use AI. And then the irony of talking about like climate change with AI. And so like these sorts of, you know, things that are pulling in at each other is it's a really important thing to consider. And I think, yeah, I think that's all I have to say about it, is those first steps. And I'm grateful that these panels are happening, and I hope they continue to happen and are continue to be localized to the context of the lands that we're on. Because of course, like, it's different all over the nation, so-called nation of Canada. And so it's important to have those conversations locally as well, and bring in perhaps like, I don't know, focus groups or something to talk about that, or go into community and build those relationships, and, you know, go to them and ask about what they think is our solutions, and how do their knowledge systems potentially work or don't work within AI, and their concerns as well is an important piece. And, you know, something that I always tell researchers as well is, you know, go do that work, go and do that reconciliation work of making those relationships, and not using the relationships of others around you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Hannah, and appreciating the insight around some solutions. Majid, over to you. As AI becomes more capable of managing complex systems, how can we ensure that AI complements the work of water operators rather than replacing the essential human expertise and Indigenous community knowledge?
Maybe I'll give a analogy and then relate to that. So if you think about an expert mechanic, at least currently, I mean, future things might be different, but a mechanic, when he drives a car or he sees a car, he may get a sense of how good it's running, and whether there is an opportunity for this car to fail in maybe next 10 days or next few months or something like that. So because they do have the expertise, they can hear how the car is running, how it sounds, and all those kind of things. So the same thing exists with the water operator. They do have certain experience that comes, or certain skills that comes with experience, and also knowing what's happening around in their landscape, in their territory, and so on. So when they enter, a water operator, when it enters into the water system, a water treatment system, they can feel or they can hear the sound of such and such pump that is working, and they can get a sense of what might happen or what might come down the road. So these are some of the skills that at least today cannot be replaced. Down the road, it may be possible. I mean, that's what sometimes people fear about AI. But aside from that, if you think about what the role of an operator is within the community, an operator often in an Indigenous community has multiple tasks and responsibility. They are responsible for clearing the roads. They are responsible for basically clearing the garbage from and taking care of that. They are responsible for other maintenance activities that are happening in the community. So they do have so many things on their plate. So what we hope is that the AI and the capabilities that it can bring can free up their time, so they don't have to travel, for example, multiple miles and spend half a day to go to water treatment plant to just check on something. They can actually rely on the capabilities that AI brings to be able to address those problems, while they can take care of some of the other aspects. So that's one aspect. When it comes to local knowledge, AI is not going to make a decision, or at least for now, about, for example, how people are feeling, for example, about a certain chemical that is added in the water. So an operator is the one who can make a decision. So I'll give one example. I mean, chlorine is something that we all add into our water to make sure that the water stays safe and for consumption. Now, if the operator, based on the local knowledge, based on knowing the community members, if he or she finds that there are certain peoples who have sensitivity towards that, or who have objections based on their cultural values, he may make a decision given circumstances that is around their water source or around their community to adjust that, to interfere, to basically change the level of chlorine that is added into the water. So these are the things that require the interference of a person with understanding of what's happening in the community. I mean, over time, some of these could be addressed or some of these could be taken over, but eventually, at the end of the day, the person who's the operator, who has the skills, who knows the community, needs to make a decision. I mean, this is the case. I mean, the same thing earlier was mentioned about the instructors. I mean, there are certain aspects that an instructor of a course need to bring their own knowledge. So the same thing is going to be around the operators in the community as well.
Thank you so much, Majid. I think that's such an important point about decision making and who makes those decisions. Thank you. The next question's for Craig. As you look toward advancing your work and research on speech technologies for interior Salish languages, what are the main ethical considerations and potential impacts you see AI having in this area? And what are your recommendations to ensure the protection of language sovereignty and community self-determination?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and really appreciate the responses I'm hearing from the panelists. Yeah, I was happy to hear this term "human in the loop" because I think this is really key when we're talking about AI and language revitalization. Because what we don't want is we don't want a zero resource scenario where we're looking at AI as solving language learning. Like and I think there's a lot of people working in this field, people like Stephen Bird, who are looking at how language is being revitalized, and that the importance that of the transmission, that we honor traditional ways of language transmission, and that we're not thinking of AI as a scenario where you're basically I mean, machine translation is great, but are we losing out on the process of learning? And I think this is too, it comes up again, because I taught at OC last year, and I was shocked at how many people just kept using AI to write their essays. Like after again and again, I said, don't. And I think the point was made quite clearly, and that I think we really need to make a stance around the ethics of our own relationship to AI. And when it comes to my own hopes around speech technologies and advancing them for the Salish communities, I'll really stress that it's the leaders, and I'm very grateful to have leadership at the Anaukin Center, where I don't always understand why things are taking the time they're taking, but I trust in that process, and I understand that the community has to go on its own journey when it comes to how, for example, the technology I helped develop is going to be used in the relationship to language learning. In terms of other AIs, I'm really enjoying hearing from some of the other panelists in terms of what's possible to avoid some of these hallucinations and to avoid some of these pitfalls. But I mean, for me, as I move forward, I'm just interested in building, local capacity, making sure that the leaders are putting in place the ethical frameworks and the taking in. I'm very much an early adopter. I always have been. I get excited and I want things to be, I want to see results as well. So I identify with that. But what I learn again and again is to slow down and to trust in the process that the community needs to take in order to adopt these technologies. And I think, I mean, as a whole, humanity as a whole has a lot to learn from slowing down. As a digital humanities student, what I always said is my goal was to learn how to put the human before the digital. And I think, on a whole, we all need to try to do that when it comes to AI in general. But I have so much inspiration from the community. Behind me is a picture of the streams behind the Analkin Center, and those are all, it's filled with salmon that have come back, and they've returned in record numbers this year. After 4 years being there, and I've seen them release the fry every year, singing and drumming. And to see the result of that with my own eyes lifts me up in this way that gives me a strong feeling that so much is possible with the culture and the language as well, and that there's technologies beyond my understanding that I need to have faith in, and I do. And so I hope that the conversation here can continue to expand, because I think it's so important. That was a rambling response, but I just inspired by all the panelists and looking forward to what the future may hold. But in terms of speech technologies and myself, I look to what the Maori have done, and it's amazing, right? But I met some people at LREC this year, Maori, that were just blew my mind in terms of what they've developed. And they've developed automatic speech recognition models that are done all within the community, and that don't go on they're not releasing them on the internet. There's no fear of that data, of losing control of that data. They've been able to take tapes that they've recorded for the last 35 years of fluent speakers, and they've built their own data structures. And yeah, so much is possible, but it has to be done with the community leading it. And but these conversations are so important, so we can help support that leadership the best as we can as researchers, settler researchers, and but yeah,
Thank
grateful
you.
for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg, and appreciating your insights around the protection of language sovereignty. Last question from the structured questions is to you, Raymond. As an educator deeply involved in understanding AI's technical role in knowledge dissemination, how can we effectively teach students, faculty, and staff to engage with AI tools in ways that ensure accuracy of information and ethical use of these technologies?
Thank you for the question. Like all of these questions, it's almost impossible to answer them because they're so very broad. First of all, if you're an instructor or faculty in the room, think about, first of all, what your personal engagement is in AI, like the first response I gave, and then what your engagement in AI will be in your particular course. And as an instructor, just know that there are so much capabilities for what AI can do. We're not underselling it, that it's got to change how you approach teaching in your classroom. This is one of these foundational moments that things probably will change. Doesn't matter what domain you're in. Whether that's using AI or not, that is your decision, but you have to address it in the classroom. So I'll use my class as an example. I teach third-year computer science. Computer science is one of those courses that AI is really good at because it's trained on all the knowledge that's there on computer science. The very first class, I say 90% of the assignments, if AI did the assignments, it would get 90% on this course. How do I know that? I actually did it. I put all my assignments into AI and saw what it did and marked it. If you haven't seen for yourself, that would be one takeaway I strongly encourage you to do, so you can see what the students can do. But I tell them right up there. And while I'm on my soapbox, I say, great. So if you submit an AI assignment to me and AI can do it, why would I ever hire you when you're a grad? And so the whole point is for your learning, for your learning. So one of the things I'm worried about, the fear, is as an instructor, I can auto-generate AI assignments. I'm working on auto-marking AI assignments, including essays in my research group. And now students can just take my assignment and have AI do it. So there's no human in the loop in the entire thing. AI wrote the assignment, AI created the assignment, and the students used AI to write the assignment. So even though AI is such a powerful technology, we really have to remember that human in the loop. Students are here to learn. The technology doesn't allow us to detect AI submissions. So the right way to go with that is having that personal engagement with the students and why it's so important to them. So I really encourage instructors to have your defined reason for what AI is good for and how you use it. And by the end of the course, I actually say you can't use AI until the very last project. And then right before the very last project in the last 2 weeks, I said, you remember lab 6? This is what AI can do. And I actually just demonstrated to them. And of course, AI gets 100% in 2 seconds. Like I can just demonstrate to them. So because they will need this skill set too. So even though we have to adjust to it in terms of how we educate our students, we also have to realize we have to educate them on how they effectively use AI in whatever domain you are in. And I actually think this becomes even harder in the Indigenous space because, one, do we trust the answers that are coming back from AI created by billion-dollar companies trained on Western knowledge, which probably is not the case. But then two, how as we as educators allow us to, students are using this technology, how do we still allow them to use technology in an ethical, safe way? And students are looking at us to lead. All they know is this gives me the answers quickly. And so they're going to use it. So we have to demonstrate a proper behavior and what makes sense at the educational space and at the professional space. And we don't have all the right answers, but there is a community. And I want to call out Christina Hendricks for putting together the guidelines at UBC for generative AI. And we have knowledge and resources there. So if you feel as an instructor you're alone, you're not. We're all figuring this out though. There's not no one right answer, but there is a community that we're all trying to discover what it is and what's relevant to us. And it's really important for our students to do that because they're using it, but they often don't use it in the ways that would be beneficial to them. We all know of the issues with academic integrity. That is there. And AI is not going to solve that for us necessarily either. We really have to come up with good approaches on educating our students the proper ways of using AI in our classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you for your insight, Raymond, appreciating that. So this concludes our structured questions. What we would really love to do now is open the space for questions from the audience to our panelists. So please don't be shy and let us know what you're thinking about, what you would like to hear more about, and we'll get the conversation going. Who's brave to go first?
Again, I'll give you my background too. I'm a social scientist. I got a PhD in psychology, so I have that whole Western perspective. When I heard the language that they're talking about language in its presentation and knowledge, I got a sense of hierarchical knowledge, that certain people could have this knowledge and other people could not have that knowledge. And at a really fundamental level, from my perspective as a scientist, selecting knowledge and keeping knowledge over here is a danger. And I'll give you the classic example, opioid. The whole problem we have with the opioid crisis, somebody had the knowledge, they kept it.
They didn't allow it to come out. It's coming out now, and now we're suing the hell out of them. But that idea of hierarchical knowledge belonging to only some people and not others runs counter to my philosophical understanding of accessibility and how knowledge is in fundamental way power, because that's what I see it as. I see the hierarchy as creating a power differential, which rubs the wrong way for me. But again, I'm entirely biased on this. So help me understand what the purpose is of that sacred knowledge being separated to some people and not others.
I can comment on some of that. So I love your question. I loved your background. I'm a philosopher at heart. At Lakehead University, I took philosophy as a non-technical elective. I wrote a paper on the ethics of hunting and killing animals because I come from a hunting and killing family, and my paper was that you must eat what you kill. You can only hunt ethically if you eat what you kill. All that to say, that's philosophy. But in terms of knowledge, I've gone to an Indigenous friendship center that was actually run by my second cousin, or he was basically a founder there. And I thought I was going to be able to bring a really good thing and say, we could put, Indigenous teachings, we could put stories in here, and we could let people access these stories from all over the world. In my band, there's only 45 of us on reserve. There's 650 off reserve. So wouldn't it be good to digitize some of these stories and have, my children, I don't live on reserve, have access to that? And they said, no, that information must come from an elder. It has to be face to face. So I even have challenges like that. I would love to see that information is power and knowledge is power. There was something I want to bring up here. I think we're kind of on schedule. I think we have a little bit of time. I did want to say that I didn't build this form of technology, this knowledge base with the real people's words founded by the people in the society. Those are the words that come out. I didn't build it because of Indigenous principles, but after we built it, and we started looking at it, and I started looking at the 7 grandfather teachings, and there's 3 of them there that are very powerful. Knowledge, truth, and wisdom. And I'm like, wow, this system is based on knowledge, truth, and wisdom. And wisdom is the experience of doing something wrong and learning how to do it right, right? That's the wisdom. It's hard to teach wisdom. You can teach knowledge, you can pass on knowledge. But those 3 things, if knowledge, truth, and wisdom are the real words coming from the real people, then that's a good thing. And that's, we can be less concerned about the ill effects of some forms of AI. But to your question, should all knowledge be shared? Some things are considered to be sacred. Some things are considered that you should only share this, in a sweat lodge. It has to be a personal interface. It has to be a personal experience. I guess in ceremony, I guess there's some things like that. So I think that just like everything, there is a spectrum of things that should be shared, and some things that, if I'm a Catholic person, I was raised Catholic. Yeah, okay, I might be comfortable going and giving my confession to a priest, but I wouldn't be comfortable giving my confession to any of you unless we had a few beers before. But so I think that, one of the wisdoms that I understand, and I'm an engineer, and I'm not a programmer anymore, but I'm still a designer. Everything is a spectrum of, black to white, and the engineer's job, the technician's job, the researcher's job is to try to find, is this a darker shade of gray than this? It's always in the nuances, and trying to understand the nuances. That's where we can make the advances. So I think that everything is a spectrum. Should all knowledge be shared? I tend to agree with you. But there are elders in my community even, and I'm sure in all communities, that believe that no, some of these things are sacred. Some of these things should not even be written down on paper, let alone digitized and put even in a sovereign data center, right? So it's a debate.
If I may. So we're not, it's clear that we're well aware that there are different barriers to knowledge in general. Like, it's not simply accessible to everyone. There are paywalls. People who typically graduate from UBC don't have access usually to their library account unless I think there may be a new mechanism, but still, like, there are, being in academia, it's very much, as we know, a white ivory tower, and there is no, like, there is, the access to knowledge isn't as open as perhaps we think it is, but like, knowledge in Indigenous communities is accessible through relationships. If you're not willing to have those relationships, then you're looking to exploit it, and that's not gonna happen. And that's what that protection piece is from. Knowledge systems run through family lineages because that has been worked on specifically with that family, with that particular piece of knowledge or talent for a very long time, and it's going to stay that way, and as it should. They've been on that land and have, like, worked with that talent or skill since, time immemorial. And so if that's what they think is right, then definitely knowledge systems that have only been on this territory for 200, 180, not even 200 years yet, definitely shouldn't have access to it. If that community, if that family says, no, thank you, we don't want to share that, then so it shall be like that. That will be that, yeah.
Other questions for
Well, I would just say in response to the comment, I think it's important to understand that more information isn't always the answer. And I think the challenge is it's not just about having access to information, it's about understanding, especially we have a lot of these days, especially you hear a lot about, the fake news and AI, hallucinating. Of course, when it comes to sacred knowledge, I think it's important to understand that it's sacred for a good reason. And sure, you may not understand or feel as I have felt this way, and I do empathize a lot with that feeling. That why is this knowledge not for me? And I think for good reason, and the reason is that knowledge has to do with a culture that's not your own, and a lot from when I'm understanding more and more, I'm in a privileged place where I get to be a part of some ceremonies, that I get to be invited into the Quilston and to hear the songs. And I don't go back and share that information with other people because it is sacred. And so really it's beginning to understand all that which beyond my immediate understanding. We don't have to share everything, and that's in part what makes it sacred. And it's also in part why I think there's a misconception that comes down from, salvage anthropology, where anthropologists were going out and they were collecting data to be saved because they thought it was all going to go away. And it's true, we have a lot to thank those anthropologists, but at the same time, that knowledge did not go away, in part because it was kept in a sacred trust, and it's still there for us to learn, and we need to be patient with it and have respect and remember why that respect needs to be there. But yeah, I appreciate the thought, and I think it's an important thing to really look at more closely.
Bonjour, Ian Cullen-Kas. Good morning, everybody. I'm wondering how the Indigenous folks in the panel are going to close the circle around the environmental concerns around the use of AI, water, hydro, mineral extraction. It's your business, and you have leadership positions. Like, how do you think about that? And how do you facilitate those kinds of conversations, or is it the cat's out of the bag and it's too late now?
Yeah. May I take a stab at it? So excellent question. I gave the example of using, the ChatGPT remotely in California to answer a mathematical question on a cell phone. The same person who gave that example, she was talking about to train a medium-sized model. ChatGPT and other large models like Claude and Gemini are huge models, but to train a medium-sized model, this is the training, not per inquiry. The training takes about the same carbon footprint as 10 vehicles in their lifetime to train a model. If you think about, the essence of what, some people in some applications are trying to do, we're trying to get some information, some knowledge transfer, ask a question, here's the answer. Well, the answer could be a piece of Indigenous teaching. It could be a story that someone wants to tell about, or it could be some coaching on how to build a canoe. My community recently finished its third canoe from a master canoe builder. So there's knowledge transfer, and we're transferring that knowledge into our community. But it could be a video on that, and we've made various videos about that. Well, that's all good information. That's the answer. So one way of doing things is taking a bunch of answers and putting them in a big resource and a corpus of information, letting tuning the data, grooming the data, training the data. 10 or 100 vehicles carbon footprint is invested in training that data, and now try to ask it the same question: how do I build the birch bark canoe? Well, you're going to get, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not, probably it's not, right? Why in some cases are we going this crazy full circle around to try to generate an answer when the answer is right there? Here's the knowledge keeper on how to build a master canoe builder or whatever. Why are we going to go all the way around the freaking planet to try and burn up all of this energy to get an answer that is there by a human who has knowledge, truth, and wisdom, right? So my position, I can do what I can do, is I can challenge people. That's very wasteful technology. It's not wasteful. Maybe there's an ROI. Maybe there's an ROI on that information, that truth, if it is truthful, if it is not a hallucination, maybe there is a return on investment, given everything, the whole carbon footprint, the energy consumption, et cetera, the engineers that were paid to build it, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe there's a return on investment. That's a big question these days, is are we going to see an ROI on this massive investment in AI? Our goal, this wasn't the goal when we did it, but this is the thing now. Our form of programming in AI is, here's the answer, put the answer in here, here's the question, the answer is going to come out. There's no training involved. It is an ethical and a efficient way of delivering information and delivering factual, truthful information from humans who are, great knowledge keepers. So get involved, I guess, is what I would say to myself, to anyone who wants to participate. Get involved and make sure, I have this saying, square peg, square hole. Make sure it's a square peg in a square hole. Don't try to jam a round peg in a square hole just because we have the technology that might be able to do something. It is not the answer to everything. There's a researcher called Gartner, one of the paramount researchers in the tech space. They said there are other forms of AI. Generative AI is only one form of AI. It's just one tool in the basket. Don't try to apply that tool to every AI problem or every business problem. Thank you for the question.
I think maybe I can add to that as well. I think it is a good question. When we go to community and we talk about how we can, I ask them, so what do you care about? And if you care about stuff, how can we put that information that you want to have inside of a functional database so that it can be used? And it's odd that I feel sometimes that why wouldn't they want to do it? I think to support your thoughts are, but inside of once we put it into something anywhere, how is it going to get used or misused? And back to the trust piece from earlier on, it's hard to get that barrier over, but through communication, through discovery, making it useful. In the province of Ontario currently, they have allowed anybody to do a mining claim. So inside of my home community, Wabigoon, there's a traditional territory, and there's mining claims happening all the time. right? And they want to get in front of that piece, right? You know, because they want to get in front of it so that they can determine whether or not they want to have these companies even gain access to do the exploration on, because there's certain things in the community that are associated with water or associated with the environment. And I say, well, okay, well, let's take that data that you want to have and put it into a functional, accessible database so that when this happens, you can make an assessment of it, right? You know, like, and it, but that's like, it's hard for them to understand that, or for us to understand that data that's going in there is not going to be misused for us and stuff. So it's an education. So hopefully that helps with your question.
Actually, I would like to go further than that. In some of the news, we hear that some of the largest company are looking at building mini nuclear plants to support AI. So I would like to even emphasize what Ian is saying and how can we, as a society, try to rationalize that? Because to me, it seems to be difficult to support this. And I am an AI researcher, but I just cannot understand that we would go up to that length just to have more and larger models. So any insight or thoughts on this?
Raymond? I mean, I don't want to monopolize the conversation at all. The only thing I could say is that, yeah, it seems to be insatiable. The demand for energy seems to be insatiable. Therefore, we should, you know, build mini nuclear reactors and invest a lot of money. Maybe there's a societal benefit to that. Maybe we find out that those other AIs aren't as useful in certain areas. Maybe we figure out square peg, square hole, round peg, round hole, and use those where they can be used and can be efficient and good for society, and minimize the energy demand on that side. And maybe we'll use the nuclear reactors to power things that can, I have this next project I want to work on, carbon eaters, right? Carbon dioxide eaters. And there's a chemical process out there to direct capture air and turn it into carbon nanofibers. I mean, and what would you need? You need energy to run this process. Well, solar farms would be a good idea. So build these reactors in the middle of the desert. But if we have these mini nuclear reactors, maybe they could be the source of other things. So from the requirement to build the reactor for the energy for the large language models, maybe we get another purpose to use those reactors as well. So some things, you know, they're not directly beneficial, but indirectly they could be very beneficial. So I guess what we could see is at least we're taxing those companies, those big super scalers, we call them, to invest in good areas where there could be other positive outcomes. But I agree with you, the demand seems insatiable, and the return on investment currently is hyper concern for everybody. We really have to wonder, you know, there will be tremendous losses from an investment standpoint. Everybody's investing in multiple models, multiple big company models to do the same thing. And then a lot of little companies are investing and people are putting their money in there. There will be a rationalization of all of this, and there will be losses. Absolutely. There will be huge losses in this. But eventually good things will come, and we'll figure out how to harness the technology in ways that are good for society. And maybe along the way, they develop other things like the small nuclear reactors that can be beneficial to society elsewhere.
I'll just follow up a little bit. Clearly, the environmental sustainability issue is a key question in AI, and we're bundling AI. There's a diversity of AI. So it's the large training, the models that are really cost prohibitive. We have a way of doing this as a society. So this isn't new. If you remember the internet boom at a time too, we overbuilt when the internet was new and all the cloud things. And there was some companies like Amazon that survived, and Google and many others that did not. And what's happening here, it is being driven by an investment case more than anything else, not the environmental sustainability case. What we can do as individuals, it maybe feels powerless a little bit, but you do have a choice on the technologies you use. I love the phone example as a calculator, sending off the AI. You do have a choice on the technologies you use. So you might not be able to shape the policies that Google and Microsoft put in place. I think the nuclear reactors actually is a good idea compared to some of the other ways of generating energy. But at least you can shape your own behaviors, because ultimately these companies are profit driven. And we need to remember that also as users and how you're applying to use the AI.
I just wanted to add quickly that as soon as we enter in, I mean, it's when we're talking about profit-driven motives, I think it's important to think about how when we're entering the digital record, we're entering this atmosphere that is driven by intentions that are related to profits. And I really appreciate how, when we're thinking about Indigenous knowledges and AI, how we can really approach it a little differently and try to think about how we can generate spaces that are anti-colonial spaces. And I think one of the ways that we can do this, it's moving away from these large language models, understanding and educating ourselves, and that there are many AIs, just like there are many indigenous literatures, there are many indigenous cultures. It's not it's important to put the plural on there. And I think I'm really interested in looking, for example, at small language models that are available. You can go on Hugging Face and you could download small language models and you can start to experiment with them. I'm not a computer science student, but I'm really interested in collaborating with computer science students, and to look at ways that we can subvert the capitalist model of and intentions when it comes to occupying the digital record. How can we do so in a way that doesn't prioritize making profit? And I think by looking at the different ways of making AI more efficient and less energy consumption is so important. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you for that. I just want to recognize that Dr. Majid Mohseni has had to drop off, and he had let us know, so it's all part of the plan. Any further questions, please, from anybody in the audience? If not, it's okay. We have a whole list, thanks to you, that we can read from, but we just want to open it up here first. Okay. All right. Why don't we start with the questions that came in from the signing in?
Wonderful. Yeah, as Abir said, we had some questions that came with the registration, so we printed some of those off just in case the room was feeling a little shy, and so we'll use these. One of them that we really loved was the question. It says, risks and opportunities for deeply relational AI research or use. Is that even possible? So I'm not sure who wants to tackle that, but I can read it again too. Risks and opportunities for deeply relational AI research or use. Is that even possible?
I'll just add one thing on that, and I think to Brian's earlier point, right, there's going to be different flavors of AI, and that's the critical point here is to look at what's appropriate and not to try and put everything into one category. And so the work that we've been doing with CAMA and at the community level is to look at that and take both sides of it, right, and be able to balance that preservation or that culturally sensitive approach to managing data as well as being able to elevate that to an AI level and consider both sides. And I do think it is possible, but I do think it's going to require a different level of thinking and some challenge, because, you know, I think the world is vastly looked at generative AI models like ChatGPT that have become more popular and widespread, and sort of bucketed everything in that sort of realm, without looking at whether other options are out there, what sovereign options are out there, and things like that. So.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is the author of the question in the room? Deeply relational AI research. Uh-huh.
Do you want this microphone, Nish, so we can hear you?
Okay, I can try to attempt to elaborate where I was trying to go with that question. So here's the premise of my current issue. We're talking about a technology that to me seems to be built from a Western colonial imperial core, extracting land and resources to now promote and propagate this technology that now has broad-ranging effects on the rest of us. And now we're thinking of how to share knowledge and train these tools or not, to uphold data sovereignty and Indigenous sovereignty. So is this work deeply relational in terms of our relationality to the global South, where I'm from, where we know that critical minerals, resources, servers, data centers are implicated? How do we potentially reframe our use and development of these tools to consider all of the harms and exploitations that it has historically built itself upon, and continues to build itself up through? So for me, I struggle in an analogy. I think about data as land. We use land, we extract medicine from land, we extract food from land, we grow, I want to say we grow food from land. So if we think about land sovereignty, Indigenous sovereignty, data sovereignty, cultural sovereignty, you know, how do we create relationships that are not extractive in our modern capitalist framework? And is that even possible? It's kind of that question that I continue to grapple with in my use of these tools. And I'm an early adopter as well. I always have to. I've made like so many decisions every day as to how to use these technologies and not very deliberately take myself away from using these. So yeah, it's kind of an open question about, is that future possible? And yeah, continuously making decisions with that framework in mind. So yeah, I was interested to see if the panel had any like thoughts about along those lines, or if you're grappling with these questions yourselves as developers, engineers, technologists, and human beings in the loop.
Yeah, I now I understand the question better. So, and I loved Raymond's earlier comment that each of us has to take a position on our role in AI and how we want to. And in this room, there are several researchers, if not many researchers, and we had a very good meeting with some of your colleagues yesterday on how we could research applications and frameworks and reference architectures for doing various purposes. And I think as any designer, engineer, researcher, builder, I think everyone needs to take a pause and say, what am I trying to do here? What am I trying to accomplish? And what should be the best technological approach? What should be the best approach to solving this problem? There was another grandfather teaching, and it's courage. Now, I set out to do this in 2015 or so. We had applied for our patents in 2012. In 2015, the US patent came through, and I'm like, oh, I guess I had another startup before then, many years ago, 1992 to 1997. So the dawn of the internet almost, or of the World Wide Web at least. And I set out there, and literally my brother, who was one of the co-inventors on the patent, said, Brian, I think there are smarter people out there in Google than you and Microsoft. I think this is probably a waste of time. And I mean, you have to have the courage to say, I don't think so. You know, I think that there's another way. I think that there's a way that we could do this. I'm not a machine learning engineer. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm a mechanical engineer. So I would rather build the hinge for the laptop than I would trying to work on the software that's running on the laptop. But I think we have to have the courage to apply the right tools to ask the right question. What am I doing here? Who am I doing it for? Am I doing anything that's good? And then, you know, right now there's another old saying: the opportunities are on the fringes. Everybody is going up the middle with large language model, and I can take this one, you know, out of Hugging Face, and I can tune this a medium-sized model. Nothing against what you suggested, but I can do all these things. But is that what you should be doing? You know, so many people are doing that, and we know it's consuming a lot of energy, and it's still having problems, and we don't know if there's going to be a return on investment. Ask the right question, give yourself the right guidance, talk to people. If you're going to engage with communities, talk to people in the community. And we discussed that yesterday for the project we might be considering here, is we have to go out and talk to the communities. We can't just do this in isolation and think that this is good for the Indigenous people. So my only recommendation is, it's great that you're having that question. That's the real good thing here, right? The great thing is that you're asking that question. I'm not sure if that was helpful at all.
Yeah, I think as long as AI is wrapped up and founded in that insatiable hunger for more, which as for at least, you know, in my culture is also called like the UBCO, and there's snow on the ground, so it's chill. You're not allowed, that's another thing, like stories also have timelines, and so that's another thing to consider with AI, is how in the world would it be able to replicate those timelines and for different stories to happen at different times, and can you take that away during when it's not a time? Anyways, that was a side thought. So as long as it has that insatiable hunger for more, it'll be really difficult for it to be able to even enact land sovereignty in a meaningful way. And I think that, and data sovereignty as well, and just, you know, nation sovereignty for Indigenous people. So I don't know, to me, it's an important piece to think about how, you know, Indigenous folks are the people who have been stewards and on this land since time immemorial and know how to move away from climate change or to slow it down as well. And so, of course, like you'd think that the power would be then put into those hands and restored, and land would be given back in meaningful ways, like national parks or, you know, crown land, things like that, because, you know, those aspects of giving land back is not reverse colonialism, because those frameworks and insatiable hunger don't exist in Indigenous knowledge systems. And so for it to actually be meaningfully implemented has yet to be determined or seen by me, I think, and the communities and the researchers that I work with. So yeah, I think that's, of course, an incredibly important consideration about our relationships to AI and what are we inherently backing when we're using it, and what is AI doing to, you know, the global south, like you said, and to the marginalized communities. What was it created to do, and will it be able to do the antithesis of that, if that is its core? Yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah, I would just briefly jump in when we're talking about relationality in research. So when I was working on my project and starting to understand how relationality factored in to, say, natural language processing for an under-resourced language, we want to look at words that computer scientists and computational linguists are using, such as a high-resourced versus a low-resource language. And how does that then affect how you relate to the language? And so language is always more than data. But oftentimes there's this sort of hello world phenomenon, I think, that can creep in when you're working with machines and you're making things and you're answering puzzles, right? And you get a kind of excitement when something works. I remember trying to make the speech aligner work, and I was starting to get it to work, but I needed more language data. And I was like, well, where can we get that from? But then I stopped. And so I think slowing down and thinking, yeah, well, whose data is that? Where is it coming from? And what's our intention with it? And I think all those things are so important to kind of link back to the community. So I think the conversations that we're having here that help us to sort of cross disciplines is really key. And I think UBCO, I do deeply appreciate the emphasis on interdisciplinarity that's been, I think, forged here at UBCO, because I think it's going to be crucial to building truly relational technologies, speech technologies, as well as other AIs that are going to be accountable to the communities. The speech technologies aren't new. I was reminded by Dr. Armstrong the other day that her brother August, her late brother August Armstrong, who was brilliant, was building speech technologies for the language and looking at grapheme to phoneme models and all these things back when, and envisioning, computers that could speak in this really naturalistic way back in the 70s and 80s. So yeah, I think again, it really does come back to digging deeply into our understanding of what Indigenous data sovereignty means in relationship to building the tools that are going to serve their culture.
I think that if I could add as well, I'm just really enjoying the conversation as it goes today, and where it's taken me. It reminds me of a story recently when I talked to my elder Kathy about sharing information inside of we had an interview for her, and she said, Johnny, I can't answer those questions because I need to go ask the spirit if I can share this. And back to ceremony, and Brian talks about the 7 grandfathers teachings, and maybe these discussions are bringing us to a point that AI, responsible AI, needs to get to, because the spirit knows what's going to happen. And if we bring it in the community and it goes to ceremony and they ask the spirit, and we have ceremony, maybe they will tell us how to do it responsibly. Maybe this is just our stepping stone to get to those answers that we need to have along the way. And so that's where my mind's taking me, because the spirit controls us. And it's I think it's it could be a key element, and part of what we're doing today is doing that piece as well. So
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that was a great question. And I just want to jump on John's point there a little bit, right? I'm an Indigenous person. I told you I was raised Catholic by my mom. My mom was Italian, my dad's Cree. And I am not a deeply religious person. I may believe in a unified force in the universe. I don't know. But the spirit in my mind is our own personal reflection. Maybe some people would say, shame on you, Brian, for saying that. But I think that's our own personal reflection. But of course, we were raised by our ancestors, we were raised by our parents, they passed on or whatever it is in my case. And our personal reflection is just like John said, asking that spirit, that elder who went away and said, should I share this or not? She's asking, you could say, the spirit world, but she's reflecting on her past teachings, her past conversations with elders, with aunties, with grandfathers, grandparents, and that's insight. And that's, we said, take a pause, right? Take a pause, take the time, ask the question, talk to people. And I think it was a great, it might sound a little wonky, no offense, John, ask the spirit, or maybe we should create a spirit that we can ask. But I think it's that personal reflection in my mind as a semi-spiritual person. It's asking all of our upbringing, all of our ancestors, what have I learned? Is this responsible?
Thank you. Are there any last questions before we ask our panelists to wrap and share their last thoughts? Yes, we have one.
You may have already answered this in the way you've answered all of your other questions, but as I understand it, all of the different forms of AI are data hungry, whether it's the sort of more expert system that you're building, Brian, or the sort of generative AI. and the output of all of those systems are going to be reflective of the data that is fed into them. And so if we want Indigenous values to come out of these systems, Indigenous material has to actually be put into it in the front end, or there's just no chance. And I think, as you said, Ramon, it's not currently there. But that then runs up directly against data sovereignty, and whether or not communities are actually willing to share that information, or whether it's allowable for them to share that information. I think you guys have already discussed that a whole bunch, but I'm just interested in sort of that sort of fundamental issue. And I think that's probably why these conversations need to be had even more at the community level, because they need to decide what they want reflected and what they don't want reflected in these systems.
Yeah, and I'll just comment on, our system is not that way. We literally give out the words that were put into the system, right? If you want an answer to come out, type the answer in. Now we've added a new capability. We're not, Gen AI bigots. We've added a capability. You can ask some other corpus of information, a vector database. You can ask it a question based on these documents that we've ingested or something like that. So we use RAG, but only to provide an answer for a human to review and say, yeah, that's a little better than my answer, actually, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to tweak that. Perfect that for your community, for we were written about because we speak the voice of society. Whether it's a micro society, which is a small community, or a larger society, or an enterprise, it's the words that the enterprise wants to come out. It's the words that the community wants to come out. Those are the words that come out. And therefore, those words are not changed. So in the way we do it, I can stand in front of my peers, elders, whatever, communities, and say, no, we're not going to do damage to your words. We're not going to mangle your words up. We're not going to hallucinate based on your words. Maybe someone will steal your words, so let's put them in a data center on sovereign land. We have privacy things. We're SOC 2 compliant, so we'll do all the other things to keep your data private. We'll also allow you to share your data. If you want to share it with the university, that's what we talked about yesterday. Maybe this nation will share some of their insights on a particular thing, whether it's a course topic like geology or whatever it is, or computer science. This other community decides not to share their information. But, that put the power with them, whether they want to share that information. But the information that they're going to share in our system will be exactly their words, if they have agreed on those words as a community, right? So that's another matter, that's a political matter. But I don't believe that to your question, if you take a bunch of Indigenous teachings, traditions, culture, write-ups, PhD papers, whatever, put them in a grinder and grind them up and vectorize them and then ask questions out of that, I do not believe in the authenticity of those answers. I do not believe that inherently is a good application. Tell me about how these people would think of that. I do not believe that that's going to produce good results. On the language side, where it's maybe a little bit more mechanical, but we've already talked about challenges in the deeper meanings of language. Maybe in some of those things, translation, maybe that's a more capable application of generative AI, where we can get better returns, less risk, I think. So I'm not, again, we're not Gen AI bigots, but if the purpose is to convey the intentions and beliefs of Indigenous people, I don't think I think that's the square peg. This is a round hole. I don't believe that there's a good fit there right now or anytime soon.
I would just like to follow up on it. I would just say your central premise is exactly correct. So it doesn't matter what technology you're using, whether you're using a database, AI, generative AI, fundamentally, the data you get out depends on the data you put in. So then the question comes down, forgetting about the technology, what data are you willing to put in? This hits with the Indigenous data sovereignty lens, like what data you put in, because as soon as you put it in, now, like any confidential data, it has to be protected in a certain way as soon as it's digitized or available there. So an example that's not in the Indigenous space was many companies don't allow their employees to use AI, or they only allow them to use it in certain situations, because if there's confidential information, they're doing high classified research, they don't want that data to be generally available. And so there are ways technologically to separate data out, but it's always a challenge. You always take the risk. As soon as you digitize it, you put it out there, it may be leaked out there. And once it's out, just like anything else like that. So it's especially important in this space to make those hard decisions, to consult the spirit, to reflect, whatever you want to call it. You have to make those decisions on what data you're willing to put into these systems, because that's what's going to come out. Thank you.
I think you're so right there, Ramon. I think our experience, especially on the data sovereignty side, is, you know, the past, and John will tell you this. An elder said to him once, you know, I was always taught never to write anything down because it'll be used against me, right? And so that is the philosophy that they're living in, and so sharing information has become very, you know, a thoughtful process, and it's often kept close to them because it's been used against them in the past. And so I think what we're learning is you need to involve the community. You need to ask the Indigenous people for their insights, their permission. And then when it comes to data sovereignty, you know, assuring that ownership, control, access, and possession stays with the community, as well as what does the message say? They need to control the message. The message can't be interpreted by us to be put out there. And so if they're involved in that process and the output of the AI with the input that goes in is controlled to, you know, ensure that message is clear and the intended purpose is represented, I think that's an important part of it. And so it's going to require a deeper level of conversation. Now, to your point, not everything can go in there because there are some sacred things that just aren't for sharing, and those will remain that way. And again, that needs to be part of that conversation with the community, with the elders, with the knowledge keepers, to ensure that what is willing to be shared is there.
I just like to add that it's important not to conflate generative AI with particular language tools that like machine translation that actually don't require mass amounts of data to work. And right now on the island, the National Research Council of Canada that developed the read-alongs project also are working on a text-to-speech, so synthetic speech for Gitxsan. And actually the data that they're using is extremely small. Like it's a very limited amount of data required to create a synthetic Gitxsan voice. So yeah, they're absolutely, I think anyone that's used ChatGPT and put in a question and gotten this sort of muddled answer, I've been trying to train a GPT here and put in information to see what it comes up with, and it's absolutely 10 times out of 10, it comes up with a very believable answer, but it's definitely almost always false or not how it actually is. And so I really appreciate how I hear Brian's working with a tool that's going to give responses that are accountable for the data that's been put into them. But when we're talking about speech tools, machine translation, because in communities that are, for example, I've digitized thousands of hours now of spoken language. At some point, the communities are going to want to have those transcribed. And so what we're looking at in terms of language tools, or in terms of automatic transcription, or at least the indexation of those audio tapes through AI tools is a much different matter than generative AI, and shouldn't be the two should not be conflated. But yeah, again, it's what matters is the community is in control of that, and the community understands that what data is being used, and it's not always the case that large amounts of data are required to create very effective and useful tools.
Can I add something to that?
We have one more moment. Okay. Yes.
The only thing I would add is that I recently saw, Craig, that and I'm not challenging you. I'm making this an opportunity for collaboration, not right now, but that Whisper, which was powered by ChatGPT, is being used for translation in the medical field, transcription. of medical dialogue that went on between a doctor and a patient, and a large language model was used, powered by ChatGPT, and it actually inserted whole pieces of conversations that never occurred. So it's now been, so again, right tool, wrong, or use the right technology. So if Craig is saying that there are machine learning technologies or that use small data and maybe don't have the risk of hallucinations, then those are the tools you should be using for transcription. Don't use don't use large language models for everything, because again, they can create large errors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Great, thank you. And we're just in time to do a wrap up. So if the panelists, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us your final thoughts, and maybe this time we'll start with our remote panelists. So John, over to you. Just final closing thought. We have about 30 seconds each.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. It's been very enlightening for me to understand there's a bit more about the AI and where it's at. I think that as has been stated, Raymond, is that we have to have more conversations, keep on having the conversations, and we'll get there. But we have to keep on having conversations. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, John. Over to you, Craig.
Yeah, just ditto, more conversations. Really appreciate meeting the panelists and looking forward to following up with some of them about this. In terms of AI and Indigenous knowledges, there's lots of Indigenous knowledge that can be shared in a good way. You know, let's look at the word sealk, comes from the root word yiel, which means to weave, and sealk means those who weave. And so I think part of the project is really learning how to weave knowledges in a good way, and not to be polarized, but to come together like this in dialogue with open minds, and to really be reflective and reflexive and take our time and slow down and really work on listening. And I'm so grateful to be working with a community that helps me to listen more closely to my own reactive mind, as well as grateful to be in a situation where I get to continue to learn about all these new technologies and how we can really use them for good and really work at putting the human before the digital.
Thank you so much, Craig. Pass it over to you, Raymond.
Thank you. I think I would just end with the word reflective. At the start, I said, reflect on how AI impacts you, whether it's professionally for your career. If you're in the Indigenous knowledge space, reflect on what that means to you. What data are you willing to put out there, understanding how the technology currently works? I think that's really what's important. There's a variety of AIs out there, but reflect on how you are going to approach AI going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Hannah.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me into this conversation as well. Definitely a huge piece of that reflection, I think, as well as the relational accountability piece. Of course, we're not untethered to, you know, all things, but in terms of the AI conversation, AI itself, and how we use it, but also who it affects and who it impacts in different ways. And another important aspect of this conversation is including Indigenous communities, however they see fit. So we have a lot of these conversations and lots of big conversations in academia, but having those in the communities in which it will directly affect is where I think our time is well spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Over to you, Neil.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Abir and Jessica, for this opportunity and for this event. I think it's things like this that help bring awareness and help continue the conversation. And, I think I'll add one more grandfather teaching to Brian's list, which is humility. And I think we have to be humble and we have to admit that we don't know everything, and we have to ask, right? And be patient in that asking. And sometimes it takes time to get to the answers. And You know, this valley and BC itself is filled with a rich amount of very progressive Indigenous communities, and I think it's okay to ask questions, right? And you know, look to them for answers in this world, and look for guidance when it comes to being responsible in this field. And so take advantage of that, and yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil. Over to you, Brian.
Yeah, so I'm happy and grateful that I got to be last. Neil stole my thunder already. I wanted to thank Jessica and Abir for their vision of this event and seeing it through to this point. I was so happy to be coming here, and I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to participate. I liked your questions, and we could talk all day, and we're going to go into a workshop, I guess. But I really want to thank and have everyone else thank our hosts and bringing this together.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I think I speak for Abir and myself when I say that we are so humbled to be here, and this whole experience has just been a pleasure. And we're so grateful to all of you and all of you who have joined us today. We've heard so much about ethical considerations, trust, respect, reciprocity, challenges, solutions, accountability, reflection, and possibilities. And I hope that all of those words can guide us through the afternoon, where we'll get a chance to kind of connect and communicate, and maybe come up with some more challenges or possibilities or reflections that we can share together.